Let's talk hydrogen, the H2 Hub Hydroverse podcast. We talk to experts from the world of hydrogen and molecules. The big international innovation event will then take place on June 26th at this year's Hydroverse convention in Essen, Germany. Find all the details at hydroverse-convention.com.
Welcome to Let's Talk Hydrogen, a podcast of H2 Hub on the role of hydrogen and other molecules for the energy transition. And today's special guest is Ivana Jemelkova, CEO of the Hydrogen Council, a global CEO-led initiative that brings together leading companies under a united vision on hydrogen. I would like to dive into the global perspective today on hydrogen and asking a tough question. Is there a distinctly European path? And if so, where does it lead us? And from subsidies to scale, from values to trade, I'd like to discuss with Ivana the differences between the US, Asia, and Europe, and try to put a focus on what Europe's role might be. So, Ivana, a very warm welcome. I'm really honored to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, Uwe. I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to the conversation, especially the tough questions.
Right. So let's start with the big picture. In Germany or Europe, we hear a lot of expressions like hydrogen is at a crossroad and the hype is over. And can you give us your take on or your perspective on this kind of things or the perspective of Hydrogen Council? Is this a European point of view that hydrogen is at a crossroad and you have to take decisions, or do other stakeholders in the world see it similarly?
Great question to kick us off. And look, I'd say the hydrogen sector is in a completely different place today than it was just 3 or 4 years ago. Back then, we were mostly talking about ideas, announcements, PowerPoints, frankly, but the conversation has clearly shifted. And it's all about moving from vision to execution, building, right? Building the industry, if you will. Don't take my word for it. I'll offer you 2 data points to back this up. Investment in hydrogen has grown 7 times in just the last 4 years, from $10 to $75 billion in committed capital. And similarly, we are really seeing very clearly that the project pipeline is maturing. We're seeing more projects move from feasibility into front-end engineering and design, and most importantly, to final investment decisions. Over 400 projects globally have now crossed the FID line, and that tells you something. Now, it's clear that not every project succeeds, not every idea turns into construction, but that's normal. In the early stages of wind and solar industries, typical success rates of project funnels were around the 10 to 20% mark from initial development to commissioning. And those rates are very common even today in other climate tech, could be the battery industry as well. So safe to say we've moved from announcements to actual deployment. We are building. We are more focused. There's more realism. And frankly, that's a very good thing.
I love to take this global perspective because I always think we should never forget why we are doing all this, to protect the global climate. So it's not a regional or even a national thing. So the global perspective is important. But to ask you in this direction, you're working in the US, in Europe, in Asia. You are traveling to Asia next week. What's your take on differences in strategies? So you've described the global picture, but do you see any differences in hydrogen strategies in Europe, probably in China, in the Middle East? What's the different take on that?
Super question. And Uwe, can I ask you a question back? What makes good policy? What would you say makes good policy?
Wow.
Unexpected, unprepared, I know.
Well, I think it's always to have the whole picture in mind,
right? And
do it in biteable pieces, so to say. But the strategy should be targeting the big picture.
Yeah, I mean, that integrated approach, 100%. And I would also argue that policy must be clear, must be for the long long term, so we know where we're going, it's predictable, and it's really easy to implement. And I think if we look at those 4 criteria that we just established together, the differences are very clear. Europe, let's start in Europe, started with a big ambition, with big targets, and today leads in the number of announced projects. Announced, that's very important. When it comes to getting projects over the finish line into FID, Europe is absolutely lagging behind. The pace has been noticeably slower than in other regions, and it really highlights the need to take action. We know the EU leadership is aware. When we have meetings with commissioners, those facts are on the table. And when I speak with businesses, I really hear a lot of frustration because, the regulatory complexity, uncertainty, and so on is really leading to project delays or worse, cancellation. And that is not a good place to be because we've started so well, and it's really now a question of getting it over the line. So there really is, outcry from developers who are simply asking for policy that works, that is practical, that is implemented at speed. And it's really not about perfection. It's about getting the industry going. I'll give you an example. Those who wish to supply Europe with clean hydrogen from third countries are still, and I think we're now 2-3 years into the process, facing lack of clarity on what is actually permissible, acceptable, what qualifies as clean hydrogen in Europe. We're shooting ourselves in our own foot there. Let's make sure that the rules are clear. Let's allow the industry to go, to meet the moment, to meet the needs. And it's obviously for climate, but also energy security, resilience. There's so many other issues at play today. So when I look at Europe, I see big targets, lots of potential, all the ingredients to be successful, but the pace has just not really been there. And we need to cut through that. We need to cut through that red tape. It's very simple. Now, if I take us across the Atlantic, let's contrast it for a moment with the US. I had the chance to spend 8 years in Washington, D.C. And see it up close. And I was in D.C. when the Inflation Reduction Act was announced. And back then, let's remember the reaction, right, on both sides of the Atlantic. A game changer. A really big, bold move on the US side to advance clean tech, simple, transparent, performance-based rules, and a simple principle. The lower your carbon footprint, the higher the incentive, the higher tax credit you receive. And that clarity, that simplicity has, again, led to a major momentum in the US. When we look at the global pipeline, the US has really become a leader in getting these projects to financial close, whether it's CCS-enabled hydrogen, but also big movements, big announcements in renewable hydrogen. Now, that said, obviously, things have changed massively since, 2022, 2023. And, we're all watching the situation in the US and know the challenges. The challenges are obvious. The shifts have introduced uncertainty, and we all know that's the number one enemy. We no longer know where the industry is supposed to be going, what the government is expecting and requiring, and that is definitely impacting especially electrolytic hydrogen. Now, I would argue that the US have a massive opportunity on the table. If they maintain the credits, and especially Section 45V, the credit for clean hydrogen production, they can unlock significant investment and deliver pretty much on all key priorities of the current administration: jobs, manufacturing, global competitiveness, energy independence, energy dominance, if you will. American hydrogen can be a really important component of getting the global system moving. So my message to the US would be, seize the opportunity and go for it.
But let me just ask in this direction. We've seen that in the past years, it was really a positive example. Like the IRA had really very simple, very result-orientated subsidies and strategies. But now one could have the impression that the biggest fault that you mentioned Europe is doing, like being too theoretic, too strict on regulation, and too overachieving when it comes to perfection. Well, you could have the impression that now the US is shifting to ideology, because what we are seeing now in policies and politics especially has really nothing to do with the potentials and what we need globally when it comes to energy. But do you see it the same way, or is it just a phase, or how, and what, and most importantly, how are the companies reacting? I mean, the market is not only the US, you've mentioned that. There's a big potential for Europe to import a lot of hydrogen from the US. Do you see, is this challenged at the moment by the kind of ideologic approach that American policies are taking now?
Look, we just established that good policy is really dependent on, being clear, being stable, being predictable, and being implemented swiftly. How many of these boxes are we ticking right now? And these big U-turns, we have it, then we don't have it, then we maybe have it, are the biggest enemy. Again, businesses need that environment that is conducive to actually rolling out new technologies, undertaking those necessarily more risky ventures to, bring something new to the market. So I think the U-turns are the worst. And really, we need to get back to, that clarity and predictability on where we're going. From that standpoint, Europe is actually doing well. It was very clear when the new commission came into office at the end of early this year, that they reaffirmed their commitment to hydrogen, their commitment to climate, but also their commitment to industrial competitiveness. And I thought that was really important. And that gave that message of confidence that, yes, we are still here and we are still doing it. Now, the devil's obviously in the detail, whereby we need to figure out how we're doing it. But maybe we'll get to that with another question.
Yeah, definitely. So, we kind of covered a very big region in the world, North America, or let's say North America and Europe. But there's another high potential region I would see, that is Asia. And speaking of U-turns, you can tell, or you can say a lot about how China is taking their approach on the energy transition and climate protection, that there's no U-turn there. Like, would you see, or what's your take on the Chinese perspective and the results they are achieving at the moment?
Yeah. Great question, and thank you for putting it on the table. I've sensed some reluctance to be discussing what's happening in China, but frankly, we need to talk about it. We need to understand it. And we need to understand that this is the context in which Europe is working to scale up, in which the US is working to scale up. So thank you for raising it. I think it's absolutely critical. And when we look at the facts and figures, China has emerged as a front runner in especially renewable hydrogen development. It's extremely clear. And I will add a personal story. The Hydrogen Council just returned from a business forum in Shanghai in China, where we spent nearly a week visiting sites, seeing with our own eyes what's happening, talking to international companies doing business in China, talking to the Chinese players, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you one thing. The scale and speed of what's happening in China is remarkable. While others are planning, perfecting rules, and having endless discussions, China is simply doing it. And this is something we have to be absolutely clear-eyed about. The number of projects past FID in construction, clean hydrogen production targets well past. We're well beyond what China set out to do. Electrolyzer manufacturing capacity, it's simply happening. And what's even more striking is that positions China as an emerging climate leader too. So they really entered it through the door of industrial competitiveness, global sort of technology leadership. And now as a result, and again, we're seeing it in the data, for the first time, it seems that China's CO2 emissions are either stable or falling. That's a very big difference compared to other parts of the world, many of which are claiming to be or wishing to be that climate leader. So to me, this absolutely requires attention. And what does it tell us? That decarbonization and industrial growth can and in fact must go hand in hand. It's the way to do it, supported by business cases, supported by real business activity. And frankly, the second observation is that if you really choose to make it happen and focus, you can scale up hydrogen very quickly. It's very possible, and you can do it quickly. Again, look at China, look at the facts.
I agree because in the end, it's really important to see results. And as you said, we see results in China. Of course, we also see results in Germany and Europe and other European countries. And talking about Europe and probably kind of European hydrogen identity, as far as I see it, we still try to become innovative leaders. We still can rely on a scientific-based innovation culture that really leads to very interesting technologies. But obviously, the scaling markets are not necessarily in Europe. Would you say this could be a kind of like a division of roles or like a division of the market? Giving innovative technologies to the market, but accepting or even promoting that the scaling activities are not carried out in Europe?
Uwe, perhaps 3 steps back. I think what's really important is to recognize that each market has its own philosophy, its own sort of policies and politics, its own circumstances. So I'm in no way advocating for any kind of copy-paste. I think it's simply about observing, recognizing what's happening in other parts of the world and being aware of that. And instead of divisions and competition, I'd rather be looking for connections and complementarity. We all have different resources. We all are good at something a little different. So let's bring it all together and ultimately move forward on that common goal. And that is climate action, that is decarbonization, that is energy transition, that is making our energy world more sustainable, more resilient, and more secure for as many people as we can manage. So really, I would maybe put that as the context. And then specifically on Europe, again, I'm seeing good, positive evolution, that notion of Europe not only being a climate champion, but also being an industry champion, the Draghi report, the EU competitiveness compass, that European Commission commitment to significant regulatory simplification, that's really clear to give Europe a chance to compete at global level and for Europe to create these very important international hydrogen partnerships. So it's not about building walls around Europe. It's about preparing our industry to compete at global stage and working with markets around the world who are perhaps endowed with different resources and different capabilities, and again, bringing it all together. I know it's a tough message in a world that feels more divided, but perhaps that's a way to move forward, practically, pragmatically, addressing the big issues of the day through clean energy innovation. So perhaps the one observation I would make on Europe is that I see some discrepancy between the high-level political commitment, sort of that recognition, yes, we are a bit too slow, we need to go for progress, not perfection, we need to simplify, pool, get to the results faster, and then the implementation, which is really training. So, my wish would be for the two parts of the same body to speak to each other and make sure that the implementation really follows that political guidance on simply getting things done. That I think would really allow Europe to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to compare it a little bit to some of the work that we are doing, dealing with startups, dealing with innovative partners. So it's always about taking a chance and making it happen. And what really hinders like a lot of innovative activities in Europe or throughout the world is the reluctancy to take risks. And I think what we need to do, and that's the opposite of perfection, is try things and see them succeed. So I agree, it's not about dividing the world in this kind of system and that kind of system, but everybody can contribute to the same goal, the net zero goal that we are all trying to pursue. So I agree. So when we are talking about your organization, Hydrogen Council, you're really globally active. You're really an international organization with a lot of very interesting and global players. So how do you help to navigate this global system? Let's say that, like we have regional organizations in Europe, in Asia, in the US, but you are really the global player. How do you navigate the scenery?
So perhaps for context, the Hydrogen Council brings together 140 companies based across more than 20 different markets in the Americas, in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and obviously Asia Pacific. So we really come to the table with a very global, international perspective. We work very closely with our regional national counterparts, whether it's Hydrogen Europe, the US Hydrogen Association, Canada, New Zealand. I mean, you name them, which is really fantastic. But what we bring to the table are two things. One, a CEO perspective, because the council is special because it brings together the top leaders of these organizations. So we really have, and we'll have tomorrow, for instance, 12 of the key CEOs at a table virtually to discuss what's happening, why it is happening, and what we may be able to do about it. And then secondly, really the compare, contrast, and perhaps more importantly, connect. So Hydrogen Council is the industry contributor and counterpart to governments at multilateral fora, be it the Clean Energy Ministerial, G20, COP, and what have you. We really try to contribute there and play the role of the business voice, bring those business insights into those settings. Most prominently, perhaps the International Hydrogen Trade Forum, which just took place about 2 weeks ago at the World Hydrogen Summit in Rotterdam. We had over a dozen of governments and a very strong delegation of some 20 CEOs and top leaders from our member companies. And the message could not be clearer. We are all, on the public and the private side, committed to hydrogen. We keep moving. We understand that Rome wasn't built in a day, that there's a lot of noise to cut through, and we continue to be committed to doing that. So really our job is to make sure that we have that continued support, that space to operate, and then we work with the different friends and partners in markets to actually ask for specific changes or specific actions in the different markets.
Yeah. And I would like to say you are doing a very good job doing that. So it's really important to have, as you said, the industrial perspective and not so much regional or national perspectives, but global take on the things that are lying ahead. To sum that up a little bit, Ivana, I would like to ask you, seeing the next 5 years in hydrogen globally, what would be your biggest hope, and probably what could be a big concern from your side, and in what direction should we work together?
Look, before I answer, just a quick add-on to what you said about the importance of connecting both the national, regional, and global level. All of them are important. That's the fabric of the industry. That's what will propel us forward. Let's take the example of standardization. If we do not have a common global language that we all use to define, measure, verify, certify, and ultimately value the properties of our products, the properties of our clean molecules, we will never get things done. So I'm really grateful to all the partners at national, regional level, to all the governments for being able and willing to work together, even through some discomfort, because we are trying to change things that have been in place for a long time. But I'm really grateful for that, and sending together that message of confidence, that message that we keep growing. Not everything's perfect, but we keep growing. We are staying the course. We keep moving. We keep building. I think that's really important and needs to happen both globally and nationally. Now, if you ask me about my biggest hope and biggest concern, I think it summarizes perfectly what we've been talking about today. So the biggest hope is that we actually deliver on the potential, that Europe is the leader not only in ambition, not only in announcements, but really in execution. And the building blocks are all here. We have very strong industrial players. You have some of the most fantastic, exciting innovation. We have the North Star of climate goals. So what we need now is really action. And when you ask me what kind of action, I can rattle off the list. We have very concrete suggestions on the various delegated acts, on the clarity for third country producers. It's really not rocket science. It just needs to be done, and it needs to be done in such a way that it, again, does not undermine the first movers, the clarity and confidence the industry has put in that regulation, but that it allows the framework to actually support execution. And there are some small tweaks to make sure that that happens. My biggest concern is that we miss the window, because it truly is a window. It's limited in time, and the regulatory complexity, the delays, the uncertainty, hold Europe back, while other regions, and we just talked about it, are moving faster and are ready to capture the benefits of scale and investment and also supply chain leadership. And once that ship has sailed, it has sailed.
Wow, I absolutely agree. And I really hope that the positive take on the hopes and what can happen will find a way to the decision makers' ears and hearts and brains. Because I agree, we have a time problem. It's not a problem of ability. It's a problem of doing it within the time that we have. So thank you so much for your insights into these topics. And thanks, of course, for all the work you're doing with Hydrogen Council to make this global challenge or bring the global challenge closer to global solutions.
Thank you, Uwe. Look, if I can share a parting message, in short, dear Europe, please don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And perhaps a slightly longer take on that, the actions you take now, today, this year, will define Europe's competitiveness for the next decades, perhaps decades. So let's focus on making the market work quickly, clearly, pragmatically. Let's not wait for perfection. Let's get the market moving now. Let's build.
There's no better final word for this episode. Thank you very, very much, Ivana, for taking the time talking to us. And I'm really looking forward to continue parts of the discussion and probably other parts at the Hydroverse Convention live on stage on the 26th of June in Essen. Thank you for agreeing to visit us, to share your views with us in a panel discussion. And for all you listeners to the conversation, if you like the podcast, follow us. Share the podcast and share the insights that we are sharing with you. Thanks for listening. And remember, hydrogen economy strategy is as critical as scale, and time is even more important, I would say. Thank you, Ivana, and see you next time.
Super. Thank you, Uwe. See you at Hydroverse. Looking forward to it.
That was Let's Talk Hydrogen, the H2 Hub Hydroverse podcast. Get your ticket for the Hydroverse Convention and meet the leading experts from the world of hydrogen. All details at hydroverse-convention.com.